Welcome back to FlatsClass University. Today's lesson, how to fish the ever popular Mirrodine like a pro. This little hardbait has been at the top of the twitch bait category since its arrival in 2003. In this video, I will share with you all the aspects of how this trusted lure outperforms anglers' expectations by breaking down the tackle and the technique. Plus, we will catch a few fish along the way, I promise. So get those pencils and notepads ready, because class begins right now. Put this 17 MR to work here. Generally in here on this outgoing tide, we're about halfway through it. I waited a little longer this morning so I could fish that tide as it started going out, because it's been so high on this big moon. It's just a lot better to try to fish, in my opinion, when the water is nearly halfway out. That way you're not dealing with all that high water and the fish being, well, wherever, and you can't get to them. But once it's halfway out, they can't get up underneath the tree limbs, and it's still not shallow enough to put them in the deep stuff. You can get back up in here in that little middle third of the tide, and you can usually do a little bit of damage. When I go over the dark stuff, I just get my rod tip up a little higher so it doesn't get down in the grass. And then when I get into the sand, I put it back down. Plus, I'm changing directions of the plug a little bit, which is kind of a pro move. I like to do that, change directions just a bit. So definitely one of the things you want to do when you're working a hard bait, especially something like a suspender like the Mirrodine, is work it along with the flow. See, there's a grain to the grass. If you work it with the grass, believe it or not, it does not get hung up nearly as much. You just have to keep the tempo perfect, and you can work right over the top of the grass pretty much problem free. I hung one here right on the edge. Nice redfish. Nice redfish. Oh, yeah. Like that. Like that. Try to keep constant tension on them by myself. Really good fish too. Whew. That's what I'm talking about right there. All right, let's gently get a pair of hemostats here. I did bend the barbs down on the hook, so I do have that going for me. Let's see what we got here. It's on the outside or the inside of his mouth. Stats out. It looks like there's only really one or two hooks in there, and I should be able to pull that right out. That's it. What a good looking fish. What a good looking fish. And again, you know, just understanding how to work a Mirrodine is a big deal. When I say work it like a pro, that's what I mean by working it like a pro. All right, buddy. Back in the drink. Let's catch another. So if you look closely, you can tell that I have bent the barbs down on these hooks. This is a 17 MR in the Mirrodine. This is the pinfish print. which right now with the water temperature still being pretty warm, there's a lot of these guys out here. You also, like I said earlier when I rig it with a direct connect, not a loop knot. That way I have the most feel. Now you're probably saying, well, how do you have this? How long a leader do you have? Well, the leader's not really that long, guys. It's only really about 24 inches long, and it's 30-pound presentation 2 fluorocarbon from Diamond. But I've got it connected with a blood knot here. If you look real close, try to get it where you can see it. It's connected with a blood knot, and I have that to 17-pound. This is Mamoy. This is their Soflex, 17 pounds, and it has been a really good line for me to keep trout on, especially. I don't fill the spool completely full when I'm using fluorocarbon, but I find that 14 and 17 pound weights do a really good job. This is the Bates Hundo. I'm going to tell you guys right now, if you haven't discovered this company yet for bait casting reels, you're really missing the boat. And then the rod is a Fitzgerald. This is in the all-purpose series. It's the 7.3 medium, AP73M. In the all-purpose series, it is a fantastic rod. So, shall we do it again? Let's go. Okay, sorry to take you away from the action, but I want to talk a little bit about this powerful finesse bait. In the hands of a very capable angler, you can cover a ton of real estate with that little lure. It is exactly 2 5/8 of an inch long. It weighs 3/8 of an ounce. And it comes in a myriad of colors, classic colors that have been on the palette there at Mirrolure for a long time, but these natural bait prints have become very in vogue here in the last few years. And in fact, many professional guides actually prefer these now. They say they're better than the real thing. All right, now these baits work extremely well, and I'm going to say 1.5 to 4 foot of water. But as you could see in the video, I did pretty well working it in 1 foot of water, and sometimes a little less. There are 2 important factors that you have to remember when working the Mirrodine. 1, your rod and reel setups cannot be too heavy or too fast. It will actually hurt the action of the plug. And worse yet, it will affect overall your catch ratio because you'll open up one of these smaller hooks and the fish will simply just roll off. Second is the cadence in which you work this bait. It has to have these hard, sharp, short twitches, and it's got to have a very hard stop with no forward motion at all. You do not want it to drift forward. You want to pulse, 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 dead stop. That is the trigger mechanism that makes a fish bite. Notice how I make very sharp, short twitches with hard stops. I don't let the rod drift. I don't want to pull the bait, no forward motion. And I like to mix it up, maybe 3 or 4 rips, then a hard stop, then 2 rips with a hard stop, sometimes even 1 rip with a hard stop. You can also see that I like to change the rod angles, often making the lure change directions. It also helps negotiate cover like grass and or potholes by changing the elevation of the lure in the water column. Most important, I'm in control even with this subtle erratic retrieve. And all the time the rod is moving, I'm still in position to set the hook. As I mentioned earlier in the video, it's important to have the right rod action. A medium fast is generally the right rod action. Crisp enough to send this over 100 feet, yet a forgiving enough blank so that you won't open up the factory hooks, or if you modify it, which we'll talk later about, the lighter hooks. Okay, what's the right rod length? Because of fatigue and you're working the bait down and then you're changing angles, you're working it up, you're working it to the side because you're trying to create some confusion. For me, it's best most of the time to pick a plug rod that's between 6'10" and 7'2". Yes, I know that I showed a 7'3" rod in the video earlier, but that's because I'm 6'5" gives me just a little bit more latitude with the gear. Come on. All right, now I know some of you are hardcore enthusiasts for the spinning rods. What rod would be perfect to throw the Mirrodine? You got to think fatigue there too. So I'm going to say a 7-foot medium fast spinning rod would be ideal. Paired with a 2,500 to 3,000 reel, I would put 8 to 10 pound braid with this size lure on so that you could get long casts. And at that point, leader length shouldn't be too long, but I would probably go somewhere in that 15 pound, depending on water quality, 15 pound, maybe up to 30. Once you start getting leader that's above 30, especially fluorocarbon leader that's stiffer, that sinks, you're going to need to go to a larger plug. Many of you are going to ask, so why casting gear? Why not spinning gear? Casting gear, for me personally, gives me more casting accuracy. It gives me better lure speed control, which is very important, especially in this technique. It's less fatiguing because it's just lighter. And lastly, it gives me more opportunities with different line weights. Like I can throw 20 pound braid, I can throw 65 pound braid, everything in between. Or I can throw, like you saw in this video, even fluorocarbon. So it gives me a lot of ability to switch it up and do what's necessary for where I'm fishing. I know in Florida, spinning gear is king, and it absolutely is. And a lot of that has to do with many of the anglers here only fish soft plastics, believe it or not. It's crazy, but they do. That's what they want to fish all the time. Or they fish some version of natural bait. Nothing wrong with that. But if you travel fish, let's just say you go to Texas, go to Louisiana or anywhere up in the upper Gulf Coast, Mississippi or whatnot, or even into the Carolinas where Mirrolures and hard baits are really king, where everyone loves throwing them, especially for trout. Well, when you get in those areas, you'll notice that most of the anglers, well, they're throwing casting gear, and that's where I've settled in. Okay, before we go back on the water, let's talk about a few modifications or enhancements that you can make to your lure that's going to make it perform better and your experience is going to be nicer. So 75% of the time, I'm going with the stock hooks. Why? This has a nice slow fall sink that rocks perfectly level in the water with the stock hooks. So if you're fishing that 1.5 to 4 foot depth, that's what you want to do. But let's say it's colder out, or you just want to fish shallow, or you got to fish over oyster bars, lime rock like I do here, long grass, something like that, and you need it to float shallower. Well, buy lighter wire hooks. You're not really going smaller. These are more like 1X. You can go to just the actual hook number, which is 6, and fish those and do very well, and it slows the sink rate even more, but it's still level. That's important. Okay, for me, that buoyancy and that action to be dead level and stop is important. When you tie on fluorocarbon leader, I know a lot of you have been taught over the years to put a loop knot, but if you put a loop knot, what happens is this line hangs up on that front hook all the time, especially in a crossing wind cast, or if you just get current, you'll get it hung up all the time. But look what I've done here by putting an improved clinch knot. It works extremely well. It keeps that line out in front. And guess what? It allows me to pull it level as well. If I had, let's just say, floating braid in a little bit of current or wind, and then let's just say this wasn't fluorocarbon, let's just say, imagine I want to save money and I'm using mono. Well, mono's not as dense, so it's going to float. So your lure is going to look like this in the water column. It's going to be going like that. You're going to be pulling it up, pulling it up, pulling it up. Now you know why I was using the fluorocarbon, to keep it nice and level, okay? Now, I get away with it when I'm using casting gear with a braid situation to a leader by tying on a longer piece of butt section, maybe 20 pound of fluorocarbon, and then putting a little bit of bite tippet. And that's how I keep my bait level. But that's another video. Okay, and the last tip is mash the barbs down on your trebles. It doesn't take but about 10 seconds to mash all the barbs down. Whether you switch the hooks out or not, mash the barbs down. I know many of you guys are fans of inline hooks. I personally am not a fan of inline hooks. I've used them over the last 5, 6, 7 years and tried to embrace them, and I do believe they have their place with bigger species of fish with bigger plugs. But fishing where we have to have a hard stop and have the plug perform just perfectly, it makes the plug much more out of balance. It seems like most of them are tail heavy. You got to work them harder to get the same action, and you just lose too many fish. So if you want to save yourself a lot of heartache out there on the water, just mash the barbs down. Now let's go back to the water and have some more fun. This trolling motor, I can't tell you guys how great this thing is. It is so quiet. It has got to be the biggest technology advancement for me as far as being able to use it, because trolling motors in the past have always been loud and just not friendly for sight guys like me and skinny water guys, and this thing here has revolutionized the game. Roll it out, guys. Roll. There he is. Oh yeah. This bitch right here at the end of the tunnel. I might try to get away with not netting them, but we'll see. We'll see. Made a good call here. You can see this will not be a problem, I promise you, with the bent down barbs. Now, right here. I'll just let this one go if I can keep the mouth open. There we go. That's it. Alright. Not bad. Let this guy go. I'll be back at it. The process of unlocking the perfect cadence might even change throughout the day, with considerations to water temperature, tidal flow, or just the mood of the fish in general. Ultimately, what I love about the Mirrodine is the angler gives it life. There is no built-in action. It forces you to be the energy, the fuel, that convinces a fish to do the right thing and bite. I promise you, if you take the time to learn the skill set to work the Mirrodine like a pro, it will make you a more complete angler overall. If you enjoyed today's lesson, please give us a thumbs up. Share it with your fishing buddies. I want to see each and every one of you back here in my virtual classroom tomorrow.